Well, welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you join us. This is the American Headache Society Leadership Development Series, and I'm joined today with Dr. Andrew Hershey, a colleague and a friend, and we're going to be discussing guidelines. So Dr. Andrew, I'm going to just call you Andrew.
You can just call me Andrew.
Thank you. You're the head of the Guidelines Committee for the American Headache Society, which you are fantastic at doing, and I think it's an extremely important job for our society. Can we talk a little bit about what's a guidelines, what's a consensus, what's a white paper? What are the differences between any of these things, and how does one get started in writing one of these things?
So starting with the definitions first, and the hardest and most difficult to do is the guideline. So the guideline is really the one where you have enough evidence that you can draw forth to make an absolute conclusion. They're much more rigorous. Usually you have to do and make sure there's no conflict of interest, opinions, and you grade each of the studies. So it oftentimes requires multiple randomized controlled treatment studies. One step down from that is more of the white paper, or sort of a not really an opinion piece, but a little bit more than that. So it's where you have some data, maybe open label, it may not be enough, but enough to say there is some scientific evidence and where the gaps exist. And that can oftentimes lead to a position statement. Say, we don't have enough evidence to absolutely say this, but this is the position we can take based on the existing evidence and then what we need to fill in the gaps. And then below that is really the opinion piece, which is probably, I would say, the lowest on the sort of terms of evidence, and that's where there's very little evidence, but there's enough experience using it that expert opinion, whether you use a Delphi method or just survey a group of it, can say, we really think this is the best way to do it, even though there's no science or evidence, and this is how we can reach those evidence. And I think all three are very important. I mean, it's important to recognize when there's something being done and we have no evidence to do it, but there's evidence that we can fill and gaps we can fill. So many of the, to get started with it, anybody can really do it. Most of, if not all, the guidelines or position papers or white papers and opinion pieces are coming from the sections. So the sections are a great source and component to this. In fact, we've at this meeting have asked several, just, what you presented, it would be great to get out into a guideline or opinion piece. And they go, well, we don't have enough evidence for guidelines. That's fine. Let's get it out there, and then we show how we can fill that. And so the approach, we've made it more formalized, not in terms of a strict formalization, but to make it easier for people. And the way it works is we ask if somebody has an idea, they can discuss it with anybody on the Guidelines Committee. I'm happy to discuss it with them. Michael's happy to discuss it with them, or anybody on the committee can. And then they propose or submit a proposal to us. On the web page, it sort of has an outline for that, but basically want to see what you want to answer, how you're going to do it, how you're going to control for conflict of interest, because that's a big issue. If you have one of the authors has done all the studies in there, that's a conflict, because they get some opinion based on that. They can still review it after the fact, but then started getting the blinding component. The Guidelines Committee will review it, give back suggestions, minor suggestions, and say you just do these few things and you're good to go. Major suggestions like, well, you really need to think this or that, or if you're not really sure how to do it, you start with a smart or a short proposal, and then we can help you flesh it out. Once you get the go-ahead from us, then you're on your own to go and get it done. We're always there to help as people go get it done or work through it. And then once it's completed, you submit it back to the Guidelines Committee, and we'll review it. And typically review it several rounds, and it may be back and forth and say, oh, this looks great, or you need to work on this. Once the Guidelines Committee agrees and approves it, then we send it to you guys at the Executive Board to take that final step of saying, yes, the American Headache Society recognizes this is something we want to put out. At that point, then the process is to submit it to the Headache Journal. Right. We ask that all the guidelines, the position statements, the white papers, the opinion pieces, at least get first writer reviews from Headache. It doesn't guarantee that it'll be published in Headache, but at least you want to submit it there first as our representative journal.
Yeah. So just to go through it again, guidelines, highest level of evidence, a white paper, consensus, kind of the next level, opinion piece, least level, Doesn't mean that an opinion piece or a consensus statement isn't important. It just is that there's not as high level evidence to really support a guidelines statement. And if an individual member is interested, I would not suggest an individual member take something like this upon themselves. It is a lot of work, having been a part of guidelines and consensus and opinion pieces. But if an individual is interested, the first step is really to create an outline and approach the guideline committee and have a review of the outline, not to just write the whole paper on their own or write a paper with a group and then submit it, right? Just outline first, review of the outline, some feedback, and maybe a re-review of the outline, some more feedback, then write the paper, then more feedback, then make edits, then more feedback. This sounds like a lot of work, but I promise you, you want all this feedback before anything is going to the board, because you're going to get a lot more feedback at that point. And then finally, when it's done, submission to headache, where you'll get more feedback. But really at that point, you have a pretty solid piece of work that when it's being presented, you know, you have had a lot of eyes on this. And so the evidence has been run through extensively.
Yes, and should point out at the highest level of guidelines that the American Headache Society has a formal contract or collaboration with the American Academy of Neurology. So some of these are co-produced by those. Main reason I bring that up is if people are interested in pursuing that component, in 2017 with an addendum added in 2018, the American Academy of Neurology has a process that can be read through. It's about 20 pages long, so a bit of a process, but it talks through all the steps, like how you can use a research librarian to do some of the work for you. So if you've got key phrases you want to be searched, they can do the searching for you. And many academic centers have research librarians that can help out with that process. It also talks about what does grading mean? You know, what is a grade A? What is a grade B? What is a grade C? And so even though I threw out those terms, there's clear definitions of how you can work through that. So it's not as difficult to do that. And to give you an example of one of the groups I was talking to today, they said that they started it and they had 700 articles pulled, which in and of itself sounded very a lot of work and to go through it. But having done it myself, where we've had 1,600, 2,000 papers, you start to realize very quickly you can even go by the title or the abstract. You say, this is not something we're going to include. It was a case report or case series with very little information. And so you can, and if you've ever seen one of those pseudo concert diagrams from a guideline, it may start out with 1,000 or 2,000 papers, but it quickly gets down to maybe 20. Right. So it's the hard work is those last 20 that you've really screened it down to. And you can get to that process pretty quickly. I do tend to recommend, when you ask how many people can do it, sort of the minimum I would almost say is 3. And the reason I say 3 is that all 3 I would say do each step independently. And then if at the end of each one doing it independently, there's consensus on a few of the articles, those are good to go. Those are ones you're going to review. If there's consensus on which ones to ignore, those you put in the wastebasket or beyond. It's when you have one that 2 people say yes, 1 person says no, or vice versa, that you meet and greet and say together and say, why should this one be included and why this one shouldn't be. If you can't reach consensus then oftentimes I recommend you have an outside person, 1 or 2 people, provide that extra level of independent review and not knowing how people voted one way or the other and say if it can be concluded. So you really have a full level of going through it. And it can be actually done fairly rapidly. And then once you have the consensus, using a standardized structure, filling it out, again, it sounds like a lot of work, and it is.
It is a lot of work.
Quite a bit of work.
It is,
but it can actually go very smoothly,
Yes.
and it's important for our membership, but it's also important for our patients, because with those guidelines or opinion pieces or position statements, it helps them get the treatments or the diagnosis that they need.
Yeah. One other comment I wanted to make, maybe you can explain to our audience, what do you mean by conflict? Some of our members are younger, they might not really understand conflict of interest. I think you made a really excellent point about, we all think of conflict of interest of, you were paid by someone to do something, but there's many levels of conflict of interest. Can you talk a little more about someone who is an author on many articles, how that could be a conflict, and what other areas of conflict can exist and how one has to remove themselves from review?
Yeah, I mean, clear if you're being paid to do something, that's a conflict. But if you're a participant or a site for a study, you actually know probably more ins and outs of the study than the ultimate publication came out of. You would say that would be good, but actually it could potentially be bad because what's published is the gold standard of what's out there, not what you learned 2 years into the study that they made a change.
Right.
So, you know, even though it may limit the numbers quite a bit, if you participated in the study as a site, or if you're one of the authors on the paper, you've got a sort of vested interest in getting that paper recognized. Not that you may want to do it, but it could potentially be perceived as that. So typically we do recommend, obviously if you're being paid by a sponsor of any of the studies, you can't review those. But if you participated in the study as a site or you wrote up the paper, you should exclude yourself from at least that analysis. You can say, well, that'll exclude everybody in the field. Well, you can work it in such a way that you just don't do the grading on that. Once the grading is done, and what I mean by grading, again, is how you grade that paper and the data that came out of it. Once that's finalized and you got the grade, then the analysis, you can re-enter into that component because you only then rely on what's been graded, not on everything that's been sort of backfilled before it.
All right, well, I think this has been a great conversation. Any final points you wanted to make before we end?
My biggest and best is we're always looking for people to send us guidelines or position papers or even opinion pieces. So if you have any ideas at all, don't hesitate to talk to any of us. We really want to do this. And over the last 3-4 years we've been doing this, we've actually gotten quite a few that are in progress, that are moving forward, and that have been in publication. The one last thing is with the new update on the web for AHS, we're going to start putting all those that are in their process so that for our members, you may say, is something coming down the road? You'll be able to say, yeah, somebody's working on it. Or for those people that are interested in joining a group that's already got started, that'll be available contacts to be able to get that. So we can really have this as a community effort to get things done.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic to be able to see as a member what we're actively working on at any given time is a really fantastic thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all your insights and guidelines. I'm just so excited our membership's going to get to hear about this.
Yeah, and thank you for asking me to talk today.